Welcome to my not all that secret anymore channel, Emerald, where I ramble about whatever I feel like in the laziest format possible. And I say this every single time so you know what to expect. Lazy content. I have to go ahead and say, do not trust me when I say I'm gonna read New Testament more consistently and the next video will come out soon. No, it won't. No, it won't. That won't happen. So I haven't even talked about, I haven't talked about New Testament in 6 months. It's been that long. I mean, I did make a video on Biohacker, and I did read the new Railgun volume so I could, go on the Toaru podcast and talk about it. But I haven't talked about New Testament in 6 months. It's been a long time. But you know what? It is good to be back. And I went into this saga, the Kamisato Saga, the World Rejector Saga, whatever you want to call it, New Testament 14 through 17. I went into this particular part of the series kind of cautious to an extent. I don't know how else I would describe it, because this seems to be the stretch of New Testament that people seem to have the most amount of problems with, and I am starting to think that everyone's just exaggerating their opinion, because I thought everything was, not only did I think it was fine, I thought this saga as a whole was fantastic. Now, it's probably not that surprising considering I've been very positive and also pretty, I guess you could say, charitable to everything in New Testament so far. Because when I make these videos, I'm mostly trying to point out everything that I think is particularly interesting or meaningful or just enjoyable throughout the series. And I'll point out, something that I would have liked to have seen done differently every now and then. But I like to think that I have a pretty fair mindset when I approach the series. And I will say that the Kamisato Saga is no exception. I thought this was some of the most unique and kind of in many ways some of the most interesting material that we've seen up to this point. In many ways, I'd say it's even experimental. Maybe I sound pretentious saying that. I'm not a writer. What do I know about experimentation? But as I was reading it, I had this, I don't know if I call it an epiphany, but I had this realization that I can't think of a single series that I would say is, air quotes, like Toaru. Like, can anyone give me an answer? Is there a series that you think out there is genuinely similar to a certain magical index, or just the Toaru franchise? Kazuma Kamichi has built up something so one of a kind that I don't think it can be replicated. I don't think there is really an author out there that could write something quite like what Toaru is. It is from the ground up. It is such a unique series. But that's just my thoughts. Maybe you think differently. So before I start talking about each individual volume, that is 14 through 17, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for watching. If you do, thank you for the people that have, watched this entire freaking series up to this point. I've talked about the Toaru series for several hours of content, of just ramblings, and I appreciate anyone who checks out these videos, even if it's just for 2 minutes. Feel free to, in the comments, just let me know what you thought about this saga, what your problems were with it, what you liked about it, or just whatever your general experience was with it, because that is, I think I say it on every single video, that is my favorite part, is just reading the very long, well thought out comments. It's a really fun discussion, and I like to try to encourage people to just have a discussion around it, because I'm not really worried about likes or views all that much. I kind of just enjoy talking about this series with other people that are particularly passionate about it, as I am. Anyways, New Testament 14. Bro, I read this like 3.5 months ago. My memory of it is a little hazy, but luckily I was wise enough to write notes. So just as my general thoughts on the volume as a whole, surprise, I enjoyed it a lot. I don't know how I'd rank these 4 volumes, honestly. I know which one was my favorite, but honestly, I think I enjoyed all of them on a fairly similar level. But I went into this volume particularly more cautious because I had just heard so many people kind of iffy or mixed on Kamisato as a character, or, you know, the characters surrounding him, or the arcs that he was involved in. And I should probably just stop listening to community opinions, because I don't really think it does much good for you on a personal level to just intake everyone else's opinions on every little thing all the time, instead of kind of just trying to think for yourself. But I guess in a way I try to avoid getting too deep into what everyone else thinks. But at the same time, it can be kind of interesting to compare my experiences with other people's experience. Of course, that's why I said I like having these discussions in the comments and whatnot. That aside, I went into it a little bit more cautious, but New Testament 14 kind of sold me on Kamisato right out of the gate. I was not expecting to like this volume as much as I did, and it was such an interesting setup. I want to say really this entire saga was so well thought out thematically, and in terms of the messaging, so well from the beginning of this whole arc. In New Testament 14 all the way to New Testament 17, there's a lot of really interesting developments in a lot of the characters, and there's a lot of interesting parallels between Kamisato and Toma himself that I'll get into. And I think Kamachi does a pretty outstanding job of setting up the foundation of these two different characters' philosophies, that being Toma and Kamisato. In many ways, they have many similarities, yet they have very different philosophies, like I said. While they have very different methodologies, and they often arrive at different conclusions, there's still many similarities that can be drawn from these two. But before we can get too deep into that, kind of just setting things up, I really liked how this volume switched from the perspective of Toma and Kamisato constantly. And that's not an abnormal thing for Toaru to do, or Index especially to do, to just switch from, you know, multiple different perspectives. It happens all the time. But it's kind of different in this case because Kamisato is someone who we don't really know how to view him as the reader. Is he an antagonist to Toma? Is he another protagonist? What exactly is Kamisato? And so the perspectives of both of them, as there's a lot of tension between them, reading makes for a really interesting sort of experience. In addition to that, it just involves one of my favorite characters from the series, that is Lavinia Birdway. I don't know if I've mentioned that, but yeah, Lavinia is absolutely one of my favorite characters, and I thought I had a lot of good things to say about her in this arc that I'll kind of get more into. And also we get more Nephthys in this, which I really enjoyed. Nyang Nyang, I was saying it wrong. I might still be saying it wrong, but I was saying it wrong in my other video. I was saying Nyang Nyang, but I think it's Nyang Nyang is probably closer in my American tongue to pronounce it. But I was really worried that, they were going to be completely done for. we weren't going to get anything from some of those magic gods again. But luckily Nephthys, in this volume, is active, and I have to say Nephthys had a very interesting background story as to how she became a magic god, or lore. I guess I'll just say lore, generally speaking. I really liked the lore behind her. And then just on a fundamental level, I just enjoy her presence. Maybe because she's hot, I don't know, but she's also just a really fun character. And then, of course, I cannot not mention Kihara no Kan, the magic god slaying dog. I love this series so much because I can say that. But anyways, to get into some of the meat and potatoes of this volume, there's pretty interesting discussion early on between Othinus and Toma. So, essentially, Othinus tells Toma that the more lethal weapons he has at his disposal, the more likely he is to get the opposite results of what it is he really wants. And so they kind of talk about how when Toma was fighting High Priest from New Testament 13, he had pretty much given up on High Priest immediately. After a certain point, he didn't really try to talk anything out. He didn't really try to find the optimal solution in accordance with Toma's worldview. I gotta stop hitting my desk as I end a sentence. But I'll just read what Othinus says. Not the entire thing. I'll just read this one part that gets the point across. So she says, "Would you be able to save more people if you trained in martial arts? Would you be able to resolve things more smartly if you had a gun or a knife? That would have the exact opposite effect. The more means of killing you have, and the farther you move from the path that saves your opponent using their own power, the weaker you will become. That alone is certain. You might not like having someone else act like they understand you, but as someone who was saved by you, I do understand. Othinus was a character that Toma unrelentingly attempted to save. We're talking about a girl that killed him like billions of times and tortured him in the most like sufferable ways possible. And it never killed Toma's desire to save Othinus, up until the very end. And that is not how he handled High Priest. On High Priest, he gave up on him fairly quickly. And Othinus even says that evil is created when someone gives up on someone else. And that's not her saying it is evil to give up on someone else. That's her saying that when you give up on someone else, you are essentially forcing them down an evil path, which this is what she's saying. This is her idea. I don't fully agree with it, the line of logic that this kind of thinking goes down, but I do understand what she's saying. And it's not an unpopular line of thought. I guess I would say it's essentially the concept that rehabilitation is more important than punishment, but maybe that's me kind of skewing what they're saying a little bit, because I don't think that's exactly what Kamichi's trying to get across here. But she is hammering home this idea that Toma should not be so quick to give up on saving someone and turning their life around, because doing so, as she says, removes their path to salvation, and once they're cut off from everyone else, they become evil. That I do understand. It's kind of like this concept of when you've been outcasted or given up on by everyone else in society, you kind of become the villain that they portray you to be. And it's kind of a funny little comparison. I actually remember PewDiePie, of all people, saying this same exact thing, that when there was this time when the media was portraying him under a certain light, he felt this desire to become this sort of terrible person that they were depicting him as. It's kind of a weird sort of aspect of human nature, but it is very real. And so while I don't fully agree with the message Othinus is getting across, I do definitely respect it, and it's definitely an interesting point of discussion for Kamichi to bring up. And it's absolutely crucial not only to Toma's character, but it's crucial to kind of one of the core messages of this arc as a whole, of this saga as a whole. I don't know if I want to call it a saga or an arc. But anyways, then we kind of switch over to Kamisato's perspective. And I'll say I thought his harem was charming at first. And notice I say at first, because I will say that I do think his harem gets increasingly more obnoxious, especially by New Testament 17. I think at New Testament 17, you're supposed to not even really like his harem anymore. But starting off, like, I thought it was kind of funny. They're pretty like outgoing, and they're really horny. They're so much hornier compared to Toma's harem. It was like, I guess, a lot more tsundere. But I will say there's a few of Kamisato's harem members that I actually really like, and I will also say I think a lot of the character designs of the new characters we are introduced to in his harem are fantastic. I really liked Ellen's design. I liked Claire's, but at the same time it was a little over the top, maybe with the freaking plants. But loved Fran's design. She hasn't been introduced in this volume yet, but I love Fran's design. I think Haimura said that's one of his favorite character designs he's ever come up with in all of Toaru, which is pretty interesting. Salome, if you want to count Salome, I love Salome. She's my PFP on Discord at this moment. Luca, of course, I loved Luca's design. But yeah, there was a lot of cool character designs. I mean, when you've got like 100 freaking characters, like, yeah, it's gonna be some good designs in there, and I enjoyed the presence of a good number of them. Of the ones who were introduced in this volume, I'd say Ellen was probably my favorite. She got a lot of chuckles out of me, and I liked her baggy sleeves. To get back to the point, I can see already off the bat why a lot of people would find his harem kind of annoying. But at this point, I thought it was actually kind of entertaining for at least, like an introductory slice of life sort of part that we kind of always get at the beginning of index volumes. I thought it was fairly entertaining. In my notes, I just said it's like a constant woman moment after woman moment, which pretty much is. But, you know, I think the characters, to an extent, they bounce off of each other pretty well. But, yeah, as we get into the sort of main conflict of the story of Lavinia essentially trying to save her sister, Patricia, who got this sampled chaga thing in her when she went on a trip to Antarctica. I'm gonna be real, I don't even remember what the full explanation was, and I'm not gonna go back and read all of it again just to remind myself. But essentially, like, she'll die, I think, something like that. And Lavinia it is revealed that she's essentially trying to sacrifice herself so that Patricia can live. And Patricia is trying to stop Lavinia from sacrificing herself to save her. And it's actually this really endearing situation where both sisters love each other enough to the point where they both would rather sacrifice themselves to save the other, which I found particularly nice because Lavinia is not a character that we get to see, that we don't really get to see that side of her too often, and so I really enjoyed that about her in this volume. And though the desire of both sisters to sacrifice themselves to save the other, that doesn't mean that they were so fully committed to it that they didn't have any sort of worries about it, because there's this really self-aware little section here of where Patricia is out late at night walking down the streets by herself trying to find Lavinia, and this is some of the most self-aware writing I've ever seen. I'll go ahead and read it. It's a little long, but it shouldn't be that bad. Anyway, she's thinking, however, a wicked side of her whispered in a corner of her heart. Part of her was rejoicing as the number of hurdles grew. Haven't you done enough? It asked. You did your best, and you let everyone in the city see how hard you worked, despite how powerless you are. So give up. You left some scars and marks behind, so just give up. Do that, and you can enter that sweet position of the poor little girl who wanted to protect something precious, did her very best, yet couldn't quite manage it. You'll get a special position as the person everyone unconditionally gives treats to, pities, and always gives top priority to. That was the joy of being weak. It was the special privilege of the weakest. She shook her head, faced forward again, and continued walking to every place she could think of. As her weariness grew, as her pain grew, and as she continued to not find her sister in place after place, that part of herself began whispering again. It asked her if she truly intended to save her sister. Was any of this effort real, or was she simply making a show of trying to save her so that the others would praise her for being so heroic? That was a question, but I read it as if it was a sentence, as if it was a statement. So that self-awareness is off the charts. And I said in my notes here, I like this little bit about self-victimization. So it's something that I think everyone experiences to an extent, where you think you're doing something good, but then you also are you're trying to avoid thinking about your selfish intentions as you're doing that good deed. So it's like, if I help this homeless man on the street, am I doing so because I genuinely want to help this homeless man, or am I doing so because I think people would praise me for helping this homeless man, right? It's this selfish sort of intent that you know deep down within you is wrong for you to think. So you have this desire to do something genuinely good, but another side of you has this desire to do something that you think is praiseworthy and that you'll be viewed highly for doing so. It's a really interesting sort of a psychological aspect within every human. So while a little bit of a random thing to kind of comment on, but I just thought it was really interesting, the comment she wrote about something like that. I was just kind of caught off guard when I read it. But anyways, to kind of get to the different perspectives in this main conflict. So Kamisato is trying to help Patricia while Toma is trying to help Lavinia. So once both sides learn the truth of the matter, Kamisato and Toma reach completely different conclusions. Kamisato is this very rational, very logically minded character. He doesn't really look for the optimal resolution. He looks for the most realistic resolution that will cause the least amount of damage. Toma, on the other hand, is a lot more idealistic, and he simply drives for the absolute best resolution possible, whether it's unrealistic or not. If it's a less than 1% chance, well, at least it's not 0. We have to go for this because it's the best possible outcome. And though, Toma's resolution is a lot more enticing when you're reading fiction like this, Kamisato's view is definitely the more, I guess I would say, common sort of approach. What I mean is, if I were in this position, I would probably align with Kamisato's way of thinking here. And that's because I'm not really such an optimistic idealist. I would consider myself, or at least I try to be a little bit more pragmatic. And I think that's a good way to describe Kamisato. I would say he's a very pragmatic character. So in that regards, he's a very interesting contrast to Toma, because he's not necessarily like an antagonist in this way, because they're both trying to achieve a similar result. They're both trying to resolve this same situation, but their methodology is completely different. But now I want to move on to probably I would say one of the most unique things that I think I've ever read. And it's this really interesting, I'm going to sound pretentious saying this, but it's like a meta commentary on harems. So to set this up, basically, I think it was around the end of World War III, Kamisato obtained the power of World Rejecter, and it was given to him basically as the unconscious desire, as a result of the unconscious desires of all of the magic gods. Now, that doesn't mean they specifically chose him. It's basically the desires of the magic gods, these super powerful beings, created World Rejecter. And World Rejecter, I like to think of it as World Rejecter, the power itself, chose the best person or object or whatever to receive it. So while the magic gods unconsciously created World Rejecter itself chose Kamisato to take form. And obviously this completely turns Kamisato's, what was his normal daily life, it just does a complete 180 as a result, and he amasses this harem. And naturally, he starts to believe that this harem that is formed around him is purely because of this right hand. He believes that the magic gods purposely manipulated this situation so that all of these, 100 girls, they were re-engineered to just fall completely head over heels for him. He does not believe himself to be someone special that, amassed this harem of girls through his own merit. It was simply the result of them being and that's what makes him so upset, is that he believes that these girls were re-engineered, like I said, manipulated, rewritten in a way to act this way towards him. And in his mind, this is an obstruction of their free will. And it's why it makes him so angry to see Toma have a positive or maybe a neutral perspective of all of this, or to have an optimistic perspective of this, because in his mind, Toma amassed his harem the same exact way. He believes that they were just re-engineered. Their free will was obstructed for him to obtain that. And that's why it makes him so angry, because he views it as something so inherently selfish, and I guess maybe even depraved to an extent. And his ultimate point is that anyone who has that right hand, who has World Rejecter, which is hard for me to say, World Rejecter, or Imagine Breaker, anyone who has that right hand will just naturally amass a sort of harem around them. Or maybe it's unnaturally. I don't know if it's natural or unnatural. I'm not really sure, actually. But in my notes, I said that Kamisato seems to parallel Toma quite a bit here, because he's going through something very similar to Toma's identity crisis in New Testament 9, where he believed that anyone could essentially become Kamijo Toma. Anyone who had saved those girls like Toma did could have just taken his place. If anyone else did what he did, then he could just essentially be Kamijo Toma, and there isn't really anything that separates him from someone else that does those exact same deeds. And what he ignores is that it was because he did those deeds that made him special. because having the drive and the bravery and the courage to do those things is what makes someone a special person in that regard, worth having someone follow them around. But Kamisato just completely rejects that concept. Kamisato basically refuses to understand what it is about him that makes him a person worth being followed. And in that regard, I think that makes him a very humble character. And in many ways, I just kind of admire that sort of perspective about him. Not that he's necessarily right, because something that Toma is essentially explaining to them in an argument over the matter, he tells Kamisato that he's not viewing the people around him as genuine human beings. He is inadvertently acting as an arbiter of how the people around him actually perceive him. Essentially, he is deciding in his mind what he thinks his harem is thinking. Basically, if a girl tells Kamisato, "Oh, I like you," he would respond no, or in his mind at least, he would respond or think that, "No, you don't like me. You were re-engineered to like me. Your attraction to me was artificially placed within you." And very ironically, because I just said he was humble, but that's actually a very arrogant sort of mindset to hold. And I just think Kamisato is such a three-dimensional character, even in just this volume that's basically introducing him. I know he was introduced in the epilogue of 13, but in 14, we really get an understanding of his character. And right off the bat, he is such a deep three-dimensional character. I really love it already at this point. But yeah, Toma, like I already said, he told Kamisato that he wasn't viewing any of the people around him as genuine human beings. And he adds that his perspective is totally pessimistic on this entire situation. And he confronts him for not at least attempting to view it from a more neutral or optimistic perspective. He tells him, why don't you just view World Rejector as that last push that was needed for this character to finally say something to you? What if, say, Claire always wanted to tell you how she feels about you or follow you? What if Claire always felt this way and World Rejector was just that last push that she needed for her to actually approach you? And I kind of, really admire that about Toma, that he does have that sort of optimistic perspective, because that's something I really respect. I don't really enjoy when someone has this wholly pessimistic view of everything, and everything is always the worst case scenario. So I admire Toma trying to open Kamisato's eyes to this possibility that maybe World Rejector actually did just have this positive effect on the people around him, and it was really just this final push those around him needed to be upfront and vocal about their feelings towards Kamisato. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff, if you ask me. It's such a weird, commentary on harems that I just was not prepared for. And it's just something you can't, where can I find something like this in another story? I don't know. It's such a weird concept to talk about, but I really love it. But I got 3 other volumes to talk about, so let me kind of just speed run the rest of the things I had to talk about in this volume. So let's talk a little bit about Nephthys. I loved Nephthys's backstory, or I guess the lore of her character. She's the weeping goddess. We're not exactly sure who specifically or who exactly she may actually represent, because there's a few different stories that are given. But essentially, you can say that she is kind of the goddess that shows up and weeps at the funerals or whatever. She's there's this story of this woman who was hired or whatever. She would show up at every funeral and cry for the person that died. And that's kind of who Nephthys is based off of to an extent. So kind of an interesting story. I could probably go more in depth just explaining everything about her backstory, but I'm not going to get into that. Just go read the wiki, bro. Just go read the wiki if that's what you're wanting. But basically we can gather that Nephthys is a sort of goddess built on this foundation of empathy. And it makes sense that she has this sort of desire to do something godlike, goddess-like, I guess I'll say, for the humans. And she sacrifices herself, and it's kind of heartbreaking scene, and it's all to save Patricia as she's essentially about to die. before this sort of operation quotes, I don't know what to call it. They are kind of performing on her, and she gives up the last like 10% of her life force to save Patricia's life. And she did so out of a desire to do something like a goddess. And it makes sense when you think about the fact that a lot of these magic gods were stuck in this distorted phase where they couldn't particularly, interact with the world whatsoever because they're so powerful. If they entered the universe normally, they would just they're so strong, it would just break. I guess something like that. The world would just break, so they had to do all this tomfoolery, trickery stuff to just be able to enter the human world at all. So being a goddess but not being able to actually really do anything in the human world would be, I guess, pretty frustrating. So she had this sort of innate desire to do something like that. And so I really enjoyed that scene. And by enjoyed, I mean I really didn't enjoy it because I was sad because it's Nephthys dying. But it's okay because, spoiler, we still get to see her again in the later parts because 90% of her was sucked up by world rejectors. So we do get to see more of her, which is pretty cool. Anyways, Nokon, how could I not mention the magic god slaying dog? Probably best dog in fiction. Who else is there? Name a better dog in fiction than Kihara Nokon. He's probably the strongest dog in fiction. Is there any dog out there that's strong? If you can find a stronger dog in fiction, please tell me, because I don't believe it exists. Have any other dogs killed magic gods? I can't think of any. Anyways, so there's some pretty interesting insight from Nokon's perspective into what it's like to be a Kihara. And I would be lying if I said I fully understood Nokon's character because frankly I don't. But I can try to say what I thought about it. So Nokon, he was noted to be very sentimental. And, a little bit of a connoisseur of romance, you could say. And it's noted that he really valued the relationship that we had with Kagun. And for a dog, I have to say he was pretty humanized. He was pretty humanized for a freaking dog. So there's a bit of a discussion around the burden of being a Kihara. Being a Kihara just seems to strip them of living any sort of a peaceful or positive lifestyle. They're kind of just destined to live very Kihara-like. And Nokon is offered to essentially give up on his life as a Kihara by this, I can't remember, some shop owner or someone that he knew. And he legitimately considered it. He legitimately contemplated it. In a way, it seemed like he wanted to break free of this sort of Kihara curse, from what I could tell, at least. But ultimately, he chooses not to. And then, in the saddest, actually, not gonna lie, sadder than Nephthys' death, he just dies in a fight with Kamisato, and it wasn't even nice. He didn't even use world rejector on him, really. He ended up just beating him to a bloody pulp. Kamisato beat this dog. He beat this dog. Kamisato, you villain! And I was more upset by that than Nephthys' death. Not that I wasn't upset by Nephthys' death, but you could almost get the vibe that she wasn't going to be around for a very long time. But Nokon, she got beat to death. And then in his dying woofs, he tells Yuitsu, who was essentially the woman that looked after him, to become a Kihara like no other. And so I think I was wrong about this, but when he said this, I thought what he meant was he wanted essentially Yuitsu to break free of what I was calling the Kihara curse and to live something akin to a positive and peaceful lifestyle. But that is not how Miss Yuitsu perceived it, and she just took that as becoming the most vile Kihara that she could. Essentially set down this path of revenge to more than just kill Kamisato, who took the life of Nokon, her dear sensei. But that wasn't really how this concluded. Like, by the end of this saga, unless there's more later down the line, which maybe there is, I don't know. I'm guessing not, but I'm not certain. But from the way the art concluded, I guess that wasn't the case. I was kind of dead set on that being the case, but I guess it wasn't really. I guess I'm kind of just confused why he would have told Yuitsu that for any other reason. From what we could kind of infer from this volume, it really to me seemed like Nokon was tired of this Kihara framework, and he wanted to accept the store owner's offer to just relieve him of it. And that would make Yuitsu a Kihara like no other, because no other Kihara has really been able to break free of that Kihara framework. But yeah, while I feel like his character was fairly short-lived in a lot of ways, I really enjoyed Nokon in this volume. I just really enjoyed his presence throughout New Testament when we did get to see him. And he's a character that I will admittedly say that I don't fully understand, but I did like him for who he was. And I also really liked this funny part about he called Kumakawa Maria his arch nemesis because she would always mess with him when she was a child, and that was pretty funny. That was pretty cute. I kind of liked visualizing that. Man, I miss Maria. I miss a lot of those New Testament 4 characters, like Omi and I can't remember the other girl's name. She had a really Safely Open Days. I kind of miss her. Yeah, I miss a lot of those New Testament 4 characters. I kind of wish we'd get to see them again. But at the same time, like Maria's character arc concluded. There's not really a need to bring her back. But yeah, to state my sort of closing thoughts on this volume, there was some cool sort of humanization with Alistair. I believe he cried over the result of the conclusion of what happened with Nokon. I meant to say this about Nephthys, but I didn't have it written in my notes in the right order. But it said that the reason that she so feared getting erased by Kamisato was that she was unsatisfied with how she had handled being a god and did not want to die before she could say she did something for humanity. So, I mean, I kind of said that, but there was just a little bit more there about her regrets and such that I didn't point out. Another thing to point out about Alistair, he was essentially hurt by his own actions, and it reminded him of the magic gods that he so hates, and it seemed like he was actually really, for the first time, maybe not the first time, I don't know, questioning himself of what he was really doing with his plan. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Honestly, dude, I feel like I don't know. I feel like I don't understand anything about Alistair. I know the next volume I have to read is New Testament 18, so maybe I'll get a better understanding, but yeah. From what I can gather, it seems like he dislikes the gods who have created what he believes is an insufficient and imperfect world, and he believes that he should be the one to correct it. Yet here he is leading people down this, what he perceives as a similar imperfect path. And the last thing I'll mention here is, oh gosh, I'm already 40 minutes into this, dude. The last thing I'll mention is the dragons, Toma's dragons, technically show up, but it's like off screen. I know it's reading, but I guess I'll say off screen anyways. Off page maybe, but Toma and Kamisato fight at the end, and you only get to see them at the very beginning as their fists are about to clash. And then it kind of goes to the epilogue or the whatever. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd like to know more about them. Oh, actually, one last thing. So in the afterword, pretty interesting, Cosmo Kamichi says that in New Testament 14, the structure of the story may have actually gone back to where it all started. The first arc with Toma saving Index and opposing Silent Kanzaki. And Silent Kanzaki kind of believed they were doing the right thing by upholding this sacrificial sort of attitude, even though it hurt to see Index lose her memories every single time. And that's kind of similar to how Kamisato believing it was okay to sacrifice Patricia's health, because he perceived it as being the only way to save both Birdway sisters. And in both arcs, Toma criticizes them for failing to find the optimal solution and deceiving themselves into believing that they had sacrificed something to continue forward. So, yeah, there we go. New Testament 15. I'll say it right here. New Testament 15. Probably my favorite volume of the bunch, the Mass Murderer Salome arc. And I'll probably say I think this is probably a top 5 favorite volume for me. And if you're wondering what that so far, a New Testament. So if you're wondering what that top 5 includes, I'd say, well, obviously New Testament 9, not in any order, but obviously New Testament 9, New Testament 4, New Testament 15, New Testament 7, and I'd probably say New Testament 11. But yeah, New Testament 15, right off the bat, absolutely love Salome's design. Absurdly cute, love the tan skin, white hair, silver hair, I guess you would say, that creepy freaking smile she's got on the one of the opening illustrations. Her outfit's pretty unique, and man, I just like Kiyotaka Himura's design so much. Like, he far and away is my favorite character designer ever. And you know, she's got, look at those ruby eyes, magenta ruby. I don't know what I'd call that, but it's nice is what it is. But yeah, so in this volume, it's because High Priest destroyed Toma's school in New Testament 13. Everyone at his school is now having to attend this other school that is both a middle school and a high school combined, and they had spare classrooms. So it's really like 3 schools in one. Must be a pretty big building, or just not a lot of students, maybe. But the return of a character I was not ever expecting, Akikawa Mie. She was like the last character I was expecting to ever come back. And then we're introduced to some other characters that I quite like, mostly Asuka Keishoin, something like that. Jumpy Bunny is her nickname. She's great. I love her. She needs to be protected. Keep that smile on your face. And my goodness, she's like the same height as Komoe, which is even better. And also attending school is Kamisato, because why not? Like, of course he would just go to this school. It's set up perfectly. I wrote in my notes that Kamisato reminds me of Goro Akechi. I don't know how many of you have played Persona 5, but he just like, when he was talking throughout this, I was thinking of him in my head. The more I think about it, the more it actually makes sense. You know, actually, as I'm thinking about it, there's like a lot of similarities that you could draw between those two. But I want to say that the way this volume started was really, it felt really different than past volumes, because we do always have like a sort of slice of life kind of section at the beginning. But this was particularly kind of interesting because it felt so oddly normal, because it was just Toma going to class like normal. Like what should be a normal day that never happens in Index, because some like world-threatening event, or at least city-threatening event, happens like almost every single day. And so this was just a really nice change of pace, and there was a lot of really fun banter throughout the beginning of this volume with Jumpy Bunny and Akikawa Mie, and how Toma didn't even remember Mie. Probably saved so many people. Obviously, he's not going to remember them all. Regardless, I really enjoyed the dynamic between essentially like the student council of this school that they moved into, and Toma and Kamisato and so on. It made for some pretty enjoyable, lighthearted reading. But then we have the introduction of Salome, who I'm all like, I didn't even have to read anything to just already like her. And she confronts 2 different people. She confronts Hamazura and Mikoto. And respect to Hamazura, who's been a little quiet lately. Respect to Hamazura, because when she confronted him, he gave this speech about why it's good to be normal. And I appreciated his humility in the speech that he gave, and his conviction to not care about other people's perception of him. And really, this whole exchange is about this concept of status and being someone special. As Hamazura says, the words that Salome spoke to him would have bothered him back when he was a skill out leader, because he wanted some sort of status for himself. He wanted everyone to think he was great, and he wanted attention. That's what he says. And then he says something pretty based. I'll put up on screen. He says, "But when you get down to it, yourself doesn't matter. Those people who wander around seriously talking about trying to find themselves are a bunch of morons. Yourself, what's that worth? Ignore it and it'll catch up to you on its own. People say they want to be something special, but I just want to ask them why they care." And then he goes on to talk about how being normal is something amazing in its own right. And then Salome calls him out and says he's probably completely dependent on item. And he says, "Even I realize that partway through saying it all. I'm probably just like those corporate slaves who only have their company logo to cling to. And I'm not even suffering and trying to escape it. I'm actually glad I'm a corporate slave, so I've got a terminal case." So Hamazura here is showing some pretty serious humility. I will always say I really admire Hamazura's path from this sort of petty criminal to someone trying to really turn his life around for the better. He seems fully committed to me to leading this sort of normal but meaningful and fulfilling sort of life that he genuinely believes is just the best path for him. And I really like it. I've always liked what Hamazura's character has stood for. But I want to go back to what he said when he called people that are trying to find themselves, quotation marks, morons. And so essentially, I really liked when he said that, because it's like, think about it this way. You are you, and trying to find yourself, quote unquote, is literally not possible. It's hard to put into words, but what you believe and everything that you do in your daily life already encompasses who you already are. It's not this concept of finding yourself is not possible. But even then, he adds, why do you care? What's so important about yourself that you need to go out and find it? Is that really going to bring some sort of meaning to your life that you couldn't find before? It's pretty doubtful. And then on the other side of this conversation, we have Salome, who appears to care about status to some extent. And you can kind of base that off of her reasoning to destroy this bank vault where they were having the conversation. And in her head, she was thinking that pulling off a bank robbery, or just destroying it in this case, because that's really what she did, would be like a symbol of prestige for her. And she seems to hold some sort of pride, you could say, about her title as a mass murderer. Wow, consider her my type. Is this like yandere taken to like a new level? Just straight up like mass murderer, and she's just like accepted anyways. It's pretty funny. Salome's character just cracks me up. So now I want to move on to her interaction with Mikoto. And I have to say, I really like what Kamichi has done with Mikoto, especially in these few arcs here. It feels like Kazuma Kamichi is exploring a side of her that we haven't really seen before. So Mikoto at this point, she's very desperate to catch up to Toma, to the point where even Salome in their interaction is calling her crazy, as well as her violently sick reactions to like being inadequate to stand by Toma, like to the point where she's actually feeling sick, which is pretty crazy. And there's generally just this really interesting tonal shift to her character throughout this arc that I really liked. It's interesting to see like just how far this series has come when, you know, you start up Index and you're like, oh man, these level 5s are like crazy strong, right? They're like the strongest in the series. They can't beat them. But then it's like now we're at the point where Mikoto, the number 3 ranked level 5, is completely self-loathing here because she is just not near powerful enough to keep up with what Toma is facing right now. So at this point, it's getting pretty interesting, and I'll definitely have more to say in some of the later volumes where a bit more happens. But I kind of want to go back to Toma and Kamisato and kind of what's happening with them. So something I noted was that Toma and Kamisato's conversations are always so tense and interesting. It's really interesting to see two people talking who have the same objective, but just totally different mindsets and methods for, you know, reaching that conclusion. And one of the main focuses of Kamisato's character is this concept of conflicting desires. So World Rejector will not work on someone who does not have conflicting desires. And it just so happens that every single member of his harem does not have conflicting desires. They are very dead set on a specific path. And there's a pretty interesting sort of discussion around that between Toma and Kamisato. Toma kind of says something along the lines that it's fine to abandon your morals and principles if it leaves everyone smiling in the end. Not gonna lie, I kind of find that to be a detestable statement. I was thinking that maybe he was trying to say it's fine to admit you're wrong about something and change your stance if you're proven wrong, but I'm not even sure that's really what he's trying to say. But it's just really interesting to me that at this point, I'm kind of agreeing more with Kamisato's perspective on a lot of things. Not to say he's completely right, because some of his thinking is still kind of warped. But I mean, some of the things Toma says, I like, I just can't really agree with Toma's mindset either. And that's not to say I don't love Toma. I'm not like trying to put him down. I'm just saying I don't particularly agree with his perspective. But in a way, that's kind of a good thing. I kind of like not really having a main character that I just agree with everything on, because they're this super righteous, perfect, Giga Chad guy that just is right about everything, and you just have to agree with them on everything because they're the main character and you're supposed to agree with them. I'm not really into that, and I don't think Toma's really supposed to be that. Toma is, I kind of think, supposed to be a bit of a self-contradicting character, but maybe I'm just kind of misunderstanding. But nevertheless, the main point I'm trying to make is that I just really love the contrast between Toma and Kamisato at this point. There's like this certain fierceness that I really enjoy about the way that Kamisato presents himself. It's interesting because he's in a very similar situation as Toma, but he's so far from just being a Toma number 2. He's so different in many ways that it just works so well for the entire progression of this arc. I mean, we have Kamisato, who, in this case, I kind of think he represents something more logical, and he cares about moral consistency, and he tries to fit everything into this like preconceived, very specific framework, whereas Toma, on the other hand, is a lot more flexible and circumstantial in his worldview. And he'll destroy, I said in my notes that he often destroys the frameworks that antagonists have formed. You know, the infamous, like, or not infamous, but the iconic sort of speeches that Toma gives to an antagonist before he beats them, before he, shatters their illusions. And to kind of touch up on Kamisato's, like, framework that I just mentioned, I guess I'll read some of the stuff that he says. It's pretty interesting and kind of gives you an idea of his sort of ideals and whatnot. He's a very uptight sort of character, and they have this sort of, him and Toma have this conversation where they just talk about something as casual as, like, what is a hobby? And they don't even agree on, like, the definition of a hobby, as Kamisato thinks it's something you need to put in much more effort into it to really call it a hobby. So he says, I might say my hobby is watching movies, but I can't list off a bunch of French films no one's ever heard of. And he says, I listen to music, but I've never been to a concert. So can he really say it's a hobby? And then Toma says that's a stupid idea. You don't have to earn a gold medal in something before you can call it a hobby. And then there's this point that he says that directly kind of is directly discussed in New Testament 17. He says, Kamisato says, I have nothing and I don't want anything I can call myself best in the world at, but I do wish I had some major achievement that was noticeable even from an objective standpoint. And in New Testament 17, he does actually talk about how he didn't want something like World Projector that made him this very unique person, different from everyone else in the world. He wanted something, basically just like a minor thing that he could brag about at school for conversations. Like, he used karaoke. Like, he used being good at karaoke as an example. Like, why couldn't I just be a normal high school boy who was moderately good at karaoke and could brag about that at school for conversation? And then to kind of further that discussion of being the best at something, he talks about the pursuit of being number one, whatever number one means. And Toma, my bad, even says it. He doesn't know what this number one actually is. But Kamisato, it says that he refused to rely on cheap tricks even if he knew he could not reach number one. But he also could not forgive himself for not reaching number one when playing fair. And then he says he wanted to reach number one fair and square, so being pushed up in the ranks by a stroke of good luck, that being a world projector, would not make him happy. It only felt awkward. That was why he sought a proper reason and justification for any good fortune he ran across. And if he could not find it, he would reject it as not his to take. He knew nothing was free, so he assumed that what he was given had been stolen somewhere along the way. In his case, he had concentrated that into his relationships. He would not allow others to spoil him, he would say it was unnatural and wrong. That is the type of character we're dealing with, and my goodness, Kamachi really put a lot of thought into Kamisato. Really, I'm just impressed by how much effort Kazuma Kamachi put into just the worldview and the perspective of Kamisato. Internally, he just seems like that complex of a character to me, and a very human character. But yeah, pretty much my point was just Toma, Kamisato, super interesting dynamic. But even apart from just Toma's interactions with Kamisato, I just love his interactions with all of the characters in this volume, really. Like, he has such fun conversations with Jumpy Bunny, because he just accidentally bullies her and makes her cry in the funniest way. And then it always results in her just crying for Mihei. It's a really funny, charming, cute sort of dynamic, I guess, to continue using that word. And then also, I just want to point out this funny scene where they go to like this arcade or whatever. Asuka, I'll just call her, is like playing this with this claw machine. It was just the ugliest, like, retired corporate mascots or something. I don't know. And one of them was like the mascot for like a porn website or something. I don't even know what it was, but she liked it. She likes the little plushies or whatever. She got 2 of them or whatever. I don't know. It was all just a really funny scene to me. I just really enjoyed it. Anyways, let's finally get into Salome, the character this arc is named after. So we get a pretty interesting and a pretty funny, in my opinion, sort of backstory of Salome and what it was like with her growing up with Kamisato, because Kamisato was her brother. But they're not blood related, so it's okay if she feels for things for him. I love that trope. Yeah, I don't care. I don't care how dumb it is. That trope is so funny every single time. But yeah, anyways, so Kamisato talks about this game, this board game that they played, where I think the goal of it is like to become president or something. I'm not going to read over all of it again, but essentially it gives you a bunch of a ton of freedom in that game, where you can just do anything. You can use any strategy to become president and stop the other person from becoming president, prime minister, whatever it was. And Salome used the method of essentially assassinating any political rival, or assassinating people that were gonna vote for some. I don't. She just basically just assassinated a bunch of people in the game, which is just psychotic and funny and kind of cute. You know, studies show that men have an odd sort of inclination towards like girls that are kind of psychotic. But yeah, Salome's psyche is actually pretty interesting, kind of bizarre, because she'll tell you herself that she's like crazy or whatever. She actually objects to being put in the same category as Accelerator and even Mikoto, because she calls both of them even crazier than herself. But there's actually a lot of odd consistency to Salome's character. She even says this quote here. She says, crazy people aren't crazy because their actions don't follow any rules. They're crazy because they never break a set of rules that only they can understand. And she says, I'll do anything if it helps you, and that includes murder. And she's talking to Kamisato. And then in a very cool twist, so in the story you think that she's gonna slaughter the Kamijo faction, but then she confronts Kamisato, her own not blood-related brother. She scolds him for this sort of rampage that he's going on, slaughtering, or erasing. No, she actually uses the word slaughtering the magic gods. And she says that the only way she thinks she can even return him to normal is not to kill everyone in Toma's faction so that he can achieve his goal, but to actually kill everyone in Kamisato's faction. That was a fun twist. That was a really cool little twist. She also says, besides, even if the victims belong to a crazy category like magic gods, the kind of normal high school boy you can find anywhere shouldn't be dirtying his hands with killing, don't you think? So really, she's just trying to uphold the identity of Kamisato, which I think is oddly endearing. And then she has this banger of a line where she says, what's this Kamisato harem nonsense? Those girls are pretending to serve you while they're really possessing you. They're holding the strings to the foolish emperor decked out in his new clothes. But yeah, then she like basically leads Accelerator there to attack his harem, which I just say I'm pretty like sad that Accelerator has not done anything in. I think the last time Accelerator was really involved in a volume was like New Testament 6. I think he showed up in 7, but all the level 5 showed up in 7 for a little while. He didn't do anything in the Oathness arc, and he hasn't done anything since either. So he's been really quiet lately. I'm really hoping that we get some more Accelerator soon. I say we as if this is like the new current volume that just came out, when in reality there's like a lot of the people watching this have probably already read all of this material. Anyways, back to Salome. So then like she like kidnaps Toma, I guess. It says that she carries him like a bag of rice. It's pretty funny. And then she starts like running away. And then Toma just asks the simple question of who Kamisato is to Salome. And then in the cutest way possible, she gets like super flustered. The art was good there. And then her hair buns like get undone and she has like twin tails. That's pretty nice. I don't know why she's so embarrassed of them, but I like them, and I think she should wear it like that more often. But yeah, her response was pretty nice. Essentially, she described the normalcy that Kamisato kind of brought to her life. She mentioned just very normal things that he helped her, like, trying to ride a bike or rejecting a boy that gave her like a love letter, or just stuff like that. Very normal big brother sort of thing. So I really loved just what she had to say about how impactful any taste of normalcy was for her. As a very feared person, it's like she admired anyone who would treat her equally to those around her. And her dialogue on all of the normal kind things that Kamisato did, I just found it to be really touching. Just because she had so much appreciation for someone who just did such common things, like nothing particularly special, but it kind of shows like how far that goes. And now that I'm thinking about it, that kind of ties into what Hamazura was telling her about living this normal, not particularly special life, and what is so amazing about being normal in their perspective, in his perspective, I should say. I wonder why I didn't think about that earlier, but that's kind of an interesting little tie-in to make. But overall, Salome is just another extremely interesting antagonist if you can even call her an antagonist, which I'm just starting to realize Kazuma Kamichi writes some of the best antagonists ever. I was, as a little bit of a side tangent, I actually recently rewatched all of Railgun with a friend of mine, and I noticed, because I haven't seen the Railgun anime ever since I started reading the light novel, and the two filler arcs, I think it's Poltergeist and it's Silent Party, you can really tell Kazuma Kamichi did not write that, because the antagonist in both of those arcs, well, it's really just Terestina, but in school, it's Terestina and, wait, are they called school? Study, my bad, Study. School's Kagene's group. But Study and Terestina are such, I'm just going to be straight up, they're just garbage villains. They're the least freaking interesting antagonists I think I've ever seen in the series. I love the antagonists that Kazuma Kamichi writes. Like, in my opinion, they're some of the most compelling antagonists in fiction, right? And I would even say Oathness is probably my favorite antagonist in fiction. But anyways, to get back to my main point, Salome, it's like this character where the arc is named after her. It's like she's supposed to be the antagonist, but it's hard to even really say that she is the antagonist. That's just the way that Kazuma Kamichi uses characters in this way is so interesting and unlike really any other series. I really enjoyed her role in this volume. I love the sort of consistency that she has, like I already kind of mentioned. Like, she doesn't even kill like defenseless commoners or innocent civilians who are like uninvolved. So basically, she will only kill someone that's necessary for her goal, which is kind of in line with what she said about people are crazy because they never break a set of rules that only they can understand. And so she lives by this very specific sort of framework. She's also just kind of, I guess you could say she's a yandere, but a kind of subversive sort of yandere. So she'll gladly kill anyone who she believes would bring down Kamisato, even if Kamisato doesn't wish for that. But on top of that, she's even willing to just straight up oppose Kamisato, who is kind of like the center of her worldview in a way. And in accordance with that, I want to point out this other really interesting line where she says, that stupid harem boy, did he completely lose his morals because everyone agrees with everything he says? A world without anyone to say no is a world without any chance to correct your actions. Why couldn't you figure that out? She's a sharp woman. She's a sharp woman. She knows the detriments of being surrounded by yes men, or I guess yes women in this case. It leads to egotism and a skewed perception of reality. It's just odd how kind of wise she is in a way. Like, obviously she's not that wise because she just kills people, but she has words of wisdom like that, which is just kind of surprising to me. And a funny line, it's like I really chuckled when she said the Kamijo faction has done nothing wrong, and when she was ranting to him. I was not expecting her to say that. I also want to point out something that she said. She made this distinction about being a hunter or being a predator. And she said being a predator and attacking defenseless people or creatures is pointless and dull. But hunting is like the overturning of the food pyramid, and that's what makes it valuable and thrilling to her. She just has really interesting psychology. And she's also just really self-aware. Like I said before, she will just straight up call herself a crazy mass murderer. Like, she acknowledges it. But she talks as if she always has been, and she's unable to change that about herself. As if being a crazy mass murderer is just a part of her genetics or something at this point. But despite all that, she's really like a surprisingly humanized character, and one that we can actually feel like some sympathy for, even though she just literally kills people and probably enjoys it. But like, she's so charming. She's so charming, and she has like a genuine outlook. I can't not like her. How can I not like this? She's really just an extremely cute and entertaining character, and like her flustered reactions, I love it. I love it. And she also has this really funny line about her chastity being the most important thing in the world. Just based Salome? What? She's pure. I'll be honest, I kind of wanted her to join the Toma faction. I kind of wanted her to leave her brother's faction. Yeah. I don't know if she ever even like comes back after. I'm not really expecting Salome to do anything in the future, which is upsetting. But I was kind of hoping she would join Toma's side. Okay, this video is gonna be way too long, dude. I gotta like speed up. Anyways, so I kind of already said what I had to say about Salome. But anyways, what else in this volume? So there was a really interesting twist. I really liked it. I love when Cosmic Commentary does this. It's this really suspenseful, mysterious sort of writing. It's the best way I can describe it is just really suspenseful, where there's this amazing twist. Mie grows very suspicious and skeptical of Asuka, Jumpy Bunny, who it was just from a random thing that happened while they were eating lunch. Like, totally, like, no one would have thought twice about it, but she was bothered by it all day. And then it gets like oddly tense as she's kind of observing Asuka at the end of the school day. And then there's this like really suspicious, like malicious side to her that's revealed. And then we find out that it was actually Yuitsu as Asuka, but it was the way it was written. As I was reading it, I thought it was really intense, and I was really into it. Those are like some of my favorite moments, and Cosmic Commentary is great at doing it. I like to think about New Testament 7. So in New Testament 7, the whole ordeal with Tsuchimikado as he's confronting that one guy, his name I can't remember, is right before he fights Toma. I had talked about it in that video, but it was this sort of situation where everything is just so unexpectedly flipped on its head that it really felt like it came out of nowhere, and it wasn't something I'd even considered up to that point reading. And I felt the same way during this volume, with this whole ordeal between Mie and Asuka. It's just this really unnerving subchapter. But yeah, I'm gonna try to just wrap this up really quickly. But the fight between like Salome, really Salome is fun to watch fight because her ability is really cool that she can essentially, I guess you could say, absorb an attack from a weapon. She adds that to her arsenal. She can use it, but she has to keep up this chain going. Like if she doesn't, I think it's, if she doesn't absorb an attack in like 3 minutes or something, she'll lose her entire chain. But what she does to counteract that is that she just carries around a bag of different weapons so that she can keep her chain going for a long time, which is pretty freaking cool. So Yuitsu does all this absolutely insane stuff where I'm not even gonna explain whatever she did with the sample Shoggoth and all that other stuff. She took World Rejector. She like this whole crazy plan. She like cut Kamisato's right hand. She took World Rejector for herself. Luckily, she didn't have conflicting desires because she's bent on this path of revenge. And she does this crazy thing where she like emulates the magic gods in a way, summons them, but it was really just a bluff. It was a pretty freaking cool bluff, I'm not gonna lie. But it was all a pretty crazy exchange, and I really loved it. You could see like Kamisato faction girls legitimately just sacrificing themselves all for the sake of saving Kamisato. I said that I do like Yuitsu as an antagonist. I thought it was pretty engaging to get like invested in a character she's definitely bad. Like she's definitely on the bad side. But you still kind of, I guess I'll just speak for myself. I still kind of felt something from the impact of her like losing someone she cared about. It was still kind of painful to read about her losing Nokon, who she cared so much about. Just watching her lose her sanity, I could still feel some sympathy for her, which is always great for an antagonist. Again, I noted that I love what is going on with Mikoto's character, honestly. And I said there's a really interesting contrast here with how Oathness reminds Toma that his strength does not come from firepower. It comes from his ability to shatter illusions and change the hearts of villains like herself. And then Toma remembers that during his fight against Yuitsu, and he drops his weapon as he remembers that. But then ironically, Mikoto resolves the issue as she gets the AAA thing, which is just insane. It's the anti-art attachment that Nokon was using. So it's ironic in the sense that Mikoto used the terrifying power of this super weapon, this lethal super weapon, to save Toma. And I like this inner conflict that Mikoto has. Her subconscious realizes that this power that she just obtained could lead her down the wrong path because she ran away from Toma so that he wouldn't see her with this new power. Yet the other part of her is so ecstatic about this new world of opportunity to grow in strength and actually stand by Toma's side. And I even specifically point out, I really liked this line that said that she even started to feel that she did not belong in the city of science. But yeah, let's just go ahead and wrap up. Final thoughts in New Testament 15. At this point, like I said, this volume is like a top 5 for me in New Testament so far. I really appreciated the shift back to like a school atmosphere early on. There was so much like tension and suspense in the later parts that just like really had me engaged. Kamisato's character just really impressing me. I think he's such a great contrast to Toma in many ways. His development in this short of a time frame has also been pretty cool. I can't believe I forgot to mention this until just now, but at the end of this volume, when Kamisato like wakes up, and after Yuitsu stole World Rejector from him, his faction, his harem, is still there by his side, and it makes him, in this really, really cool sort of emotional scene, he starts crying, now realizing that Toma was actually right, and those girls actually did legitimately care about him. They weren't just being completely manipulated by World Rejector. They weren't just blindly following World Rejector. They genuinely cared about him as a person. So yeah, I thought that was a fantastic scene. Salome, already talked about a good bit. She was a really fun and interesting character throughout the entire volume. I could see her being kind of in my favorites. You see, I keep saying that about every new arc. It's like, oh man, this character might be in my top like 20, 25 or whatever. Dude, there's so many characters in this series that I like. Every single volume is like introducing new characters that I love. Every single saga is introducing characters and like, oh yeah, this is a new favorite of mine. I don't even know who my favorites are anymore because there's just so many characters that I don't even know. And I like so many of them that I don't even know how to like rank them in my mind. But yeah, Salome, absolutely love this character. Her mass murderer psychology, and then her cute and sort of like abrasive personality, and her oddly strong ideals kind of push this volume into like a subversive sort of direction that I just was super into. My favorite moment of hers was definitely when she just like confronted Kamisato and criticized the path he was going down. And ironically, she wants him to remain on the path of a normal high school boy you can find anywhere, despite the fact that she is not that in the slightest. She's the exact opposite of that. And overall, just super on the surface, just on the surface level, she's just such a cute and endearing character. So overall, I just thought New Testament 15 was subversive in a number of ways. I really had a hard time predicting anything in this volume, which, to be fair, I am absolute trash at predicting anything in fiction. I don't know. I'm just stupid is the problem. Going into it, I wasn't expecting the antagonist of the volume to switch like from Salome to Yuitsu. Yeah, but all in all, this volume was a wild ride. Characters are progressing in ways I wasn't expecting, and there's just a lot of interesting sort of themes and concepts present. A lot of talk of like sacrifice, loyalty, and strength. And yeah, I really dug this volume. Probably my favorite of the entire saga. All right, so this is Emerald, like a week after the recording you just heard, and this video ended up being way too long. It was like almost 3 hours, and I spent an absurd amount of time recording in the first place. So yeah, I'm at the point where I can talk about any individual volume for 40 minutes or something. I mean, I talked about Biohacker. It blows my mind still that I talked about Biohacker for over an hour long, which is just kind of absurd. I don't need to be talking about a volume that long, but it's kind of interesting to think how when I first started making these videos, I think I talked about New Testament 1 or 2 in the span of like 10 minutes. For some reason now, I feel as if I have to mention every little thing that is on my mind. And I think my notes are probably getting a little bit too extensive for some of these. It really helps for making these videos to write that many notes, but at the same time, when I have all that stuff written down, I feel the need to mention all of it. And so these videos just end up way too long. So I just decided I'm going to cut the video here, and I'll upload part 2 of the Kamisato Saga probably a week from the upload date of this one. But yeah, anyways, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I greatly appreciate you. Thank you so much. And if you have any thoughts at all on these 2 volumes, feel free to leave it in the comments. Even if you're writing an essay, it's all right, because I'll read your essay and I'll respond to it. I've said many times, I say it in every single video, that is my favorite part of this channel, is just talking about series and stuff that I love with other people that are just as passionate. So, I'll say it one more time. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have the nicest, I said the nicest, day, night, week, month, year, decade, life.